Hi everyone, I'm Haninder. Along with my co-host Shubham, we are founders of StrategyConnect, a managed marketplace of boutique consulting and technology firms. Over the past few months, we have been fortunate to work very closely with IQ Data, a tech firm who are pioneers in providing geolocation analytics based services in the region. Today we are talking to Dimitri, CEO of IQ Data, who will explain more about the company's expertise in this space. Dimitri, thank you so much for your time today. Let's start by uncovering a bit about yourself. How did you get interested in this space and the genesis, the entirety of IQ Data?
All right, well, first of all, thank you for having me. Really good to see you guys again. How did it start? So I probably a good place to begin would be when I moved to the region back in 2002. So I'm one of these guys who's been here in the Middle East for quite a while, one of those expats. And I can say it's been a real adventure. When I got here, 2002, I was a kind of a budding digital marketer, and I could see very early on in my arrival to this part of the world that we were on the cusp of very large growth. And of course, to give you some sort of idea, in the Middle East, I think in about 2002, digital marketing spends for the entire region was less than $1 million. Total media marketing services spends. And, subsequently over the next 15 years or so, certainly that I've been involved in it, that's grown to over $2 billion. So, to have been fortunate enough to have witnessed the entire cycle of growth from almost utter nascency to, I think it's fair to say reasonable market maturity now, certainly in terms of spends, the number of companies operating in the space, the agencies, the expertise, the percentages of digital allocation when it comes to marketing budgets. A lot has changed. So that's really, I think, maybe a good starting point for me. I think through that time, you asked me the question about that's sort of the genesis of IQ Data and where that came about. So I've always been fascinated in marketing using digital technologies in order to better measure, to better understand your customers, to improve or optimize your spends, to drive better ROI, and all of that's predicated upon a foundational layer of using technology in order to better track, measure, and activate, right, against data, fundamentally. So for most of the history that I've been in the industry, we've gotten really good, quite sophisticated on the online space when it comes to how we measure, what we measure, how to find the signals through the noise, and really to be able to bring all that to bear so that you can move the needle when it comes to actually driving results for clients. And that's always been, for me, the big passion. And I would say about 15 years into it, we've always talked about, throughout that, I would say the latter half of that period, we always talked about closing the loop. We never understood, but we recognized equally that people don't just live online. We have lives. We shop. We visit places. We go to shops. We have lifestyles. And all of that, or most of it, I would say, fell out of our ability to measure. So we often talked about that duality of customer understanding. That is, that often if everything you're doing in terms of measurement, in terms of performance, optimization is only based on one half of the equation, then you have to be careful because you're not getting the complete picture, right? And I think we've all seen the potential pitfalls of racing to the bottom when it comes to trying to achieve some form of efficiency metric, which is only based on a limited amount of information. So what I mean by that is we'd often have marketing strategies that were heavily focused on reducing your cost per acquisitions online, right? But we didn't truly appreciate that some of the potential biggest lifetime value customers were not those that were willing to purchase online necessarily, or weren't the ones that we could drive through to a completion, sort of a data capture or a lead generation through online, But typically, those were the customers that would often use digital media in order to better understand products, services, compare, contrast, and then would walk into a store and purchase something. So really the genesis of IQ data did form, certainly out of that desire to better understand what's going on in the physical world and to bridge that with what we understood in the digital space. My co-founder, Ben Cheeseman, he was really the original founder of what was then IQ Wi-Fi back in 2016. And he was excited by the prospect of utilizing Wi-Fi technology to act as that initial data capture sensor within venues, and to be able to collect that data and then to do really interesting sort of measurement and understanding of customer movements within venues, or to understand how a shop could better lay out its products and services, or where dwell times are happening, where are the sort of pinch points in terms of customer, like user flow, or in this case retail sort of shopper flows. And that was really the beginnings. So IQ Wi-Fi started, really with the hope of leveraging Wi-Fi data. And Wi-Fi data continues to be a part of our business, but it has been relegated somewhat to, I would say, one of the peripheral aspects of what we do. And that's really because as much as Wi-Fi is a fantastic source of intelligence for a venue owner, the data that you capture is somewhat limited. It has lack of portability. You cannot activate against it so easily. And to be completely blunt with you, if you were to look today across the big retail networks in the region, who have all now got some form of Wi-Fi, measurement or some system, the vast majority of those are probably doing nothing with it. That's just the reality. And in effect, what they're using their Wi-Fi access to capture email addresses, mobile numbers, so that they can do email blasts and SMSs and, that sort of basic level kind of marketing, database marketing, sort of direct marketing approach. So that kind of put us off, to be honest, right? And we saw where that was moving. We witnessed, I think we felt, I suppose, hitting a ceiling where we didn't feel we could fully realize our potential. And that's when we shifted gears. We rebranded the company from Wi-Fi, IQ Wi-Fi, to now IQ Data. That happened about a year and a half ago. And we shifted our focus to all forms of location data, including Wi-Fi. And the new sort of, I suppose, frontier for us has been enabled by the ubiquity of a mobile device. So if there's one item that is perhaps absolutely central to any marketer's toolkit, is that mobile device, because it's the most intimate sort of access point that anybody has, and is by extension to that, perhaps one of the best devices in terms of capturing data and understanding people's habits, behaviors, interests, preferences. And so that really became the focus of the company. And so today, our vast majority of the data that we are aggregating, that we collect through licensing and working with app owners, mobile app owners, is that we do aggregate that mobile-derived location data. So that's really kind of the basis in my journey into, how we started as a business and kind of where we've ended up sort of today.
Awesome. Thanks for the beautiful explanation. And you actually put together a very good gap that was already there, like when e-commerce companies were coming into the space, into the region, and they were only focused on and digital marketing based on online channels, and they were completely disregarding offline. And you mentioned how critical it is, the offline aspect of the whole business in terms of marketing, and how IQ Data is kind of targeting that and completing the circle, completing the loop around that. And that brings me to the next question as well. When you talked about moving from Wi-Fi data to using locational data from mobile devices and all of that, can you touch a bit more about the progress that has happened in this geoanalytics space, just purely in terms of technology? What kind of sources are available to you, and how you guys are actually utilizing those resources to provide services to your current clients?
Yeah, so I think everybody can remember Bluetooth. And it all sort of started there. And I remember we did some interesting tactical activations with clients around events and kind of working with NFC sensors or Bluetooth, which obviously required a certain amount of hardware. And I think one of the most interesting ones that I had personally been involved in is where we kind of had bracelets that event goers had that allowed us to be able to track their movements across an event space in exchange for them being able to activate a kiosk or, to get a photograph or to create UGC content, something like that. And so that really started twigging our interest, I think, as marketeers, and we sort of saw that. And I'm thinking now that's probably around, I'd say late 2000s, before 2010, something like that, I would say. We started seeing some interesting activations. But of course, Bluetooth and NFC in that iteration had massive limitations. The requirement for forcing people to download an app, let's say, or to have to take a piece of hardware like a bracelet, as I mentioned, and getting them to interact with a brand, whether that's in a physical environment or otherwise, created, I think, too much complexity. And as you know, I think anybody in marketing will tell you that one degree of complexity can reduce the funnel of customer sort of, let's say, acquisition and engagement by magnitudes. So you put it in a different way. The more complicated you make it, the worse the results are going to be out of the outcome of whatever activation you're doing. So it kind of started with Bluetooth, and then that's where Wi-Fi sort of came in. Wi-Fi was a step ahead in that regard because there were most venues already have Wi-Fi systems, and so the hardware components kind of been covered. And all that remained is for cloud-based software to be installed across those access points. And then you're rolling, right? You've got now a data collection capability. And if you map that across a venue or a physical space, you can begin to cluster, look at the dwell time, see how, the movements of the pathways across venues. And it opened the door on a lot more in terms of the possibilities. But Wi-Fi also has issues, and I kind of mentioned it briefly before, and that's that, you're not working with data that's so easily portable outside of the Wi-Fi network that you've got. And typically when you're accessing Wi-Fi, irrespective of whether you log on or off, your device tends to be pinging every, 30 seconds, 20 seconds to communicate, right? To say that I am here and can connect as long as my device is Wi-Fi activated. And so there is a lot of data that you can capture out of that, but there's no way of being able to build any customer identity graphs on the back of it, because you're working with MAC addresses for the most part. They tend to be, I would say, at risk of being changed, right? Dependent upon how the operating systems work and how they apply those MAC addresses, because of course there's always privacy concerns. And being able to link back to a specific device because of the hardware makes it a little bit tricky, I think, in terms of how you straddle that privacy concern. So Wi-Fi kind of had, and I wouldn't say it's over, it still has its day in the sun, and I think it still has value. But then it kind of moved in, the location data clearly became overshadowed on the back of mobile apps. And mobile apps, everybody, I don't know what the latest numbers are, but typically anybody who has a mobile device has got at least, anywhere from hundreds of apps downloaded on their phone. And many of those apps do require a certain level of location services to be enabled for the app to function correctly. So if we're talking about a home delivery service or an Uber or anything where your location is paramount to the functioning of that app, then of course location data can be captured through that. And so we really did shift a lot into that area, and we think that that's going to continue to be a very, very big part of of, I think, the future of location analytics, no doubt. If you're talking anything based on consumers or the movement of mass aggregate level number of people, right? Across a particular geography or a space. Where is it going to go in the future? Well, certainly we hear a lot about IoT. Clearly, if that does come, to I think all the hype that kind of surrounds it. If every device we have, and we are seeing it now in your house, I think already, right? TVs are now smart TVs. A lot of the appliances, perhaps in the kitchen, your car, all of these will have sensors communicating to the internet because they can provide some form of value to their owner, right? To the owner in terms of providing services or capabilities that will enhance the experience of that particular device. So I wouldn't say if, but when IoT does explode, and it does, we talk about, or we hear the most outrageous forecasts of anywhere between, something like 10 billion to 100 billion devices connected to the internet. And that might be already old news. But that, if you imagine, and I think enabled by 5G, of course, and I think that's really important that I mention that, you're going to get to a space of hyper-connected, hyper-location, analytically optimizable sort of technology future, right? And I think that's where we see things moving, but for the time being, it's not too difficult for us to continue to build enormous capabilities and new products for our clients on the back of the mobile device itself.
That's awesome. So how I see it, like in essence, the journey of IQ Data has been essentially when you were initiating customers to share their locational ping to now using aggregated locational data and running analytics on it. And that basically puts another question. So what kind of services are your clients expecting out of these kind of locational pings that you're collecting? And if you could throw a bit of a light on that.
Certainly. So the biggest market that we've found traction has been retail, for obvious reasons. And the kind of location analytics tends to be, or the kind of services or the product value that we're positioning towards has been kind of threefold. On the one hand, they want to know more about their customers. And surprisingly, conversation after conversation, we find that most of the companies we've spoken to actually know very little. Despite their best efforts with CRM, despite what they think they know about their customers online and the way that they engage with their brand through their websites or apps, they surprisingly have very little understanding comparatively when it comes to who their customers are, what defines them demographically, interests-wise, lifestyle, where do they come from, where do they live, where do they work, where do they play. These are all nice tidbits of insights that most of the companies that operate large networks of venues, shops, stores seem to have surprisingly very little understanding about. How much is your footfall compared to between store A and store B within your own network? How can you index that? How is it impacted by seasonality? What do your customers' loyalty, typical return visits, what's the gap between it? How many of your footfall this month was brand new customers? How many of those were repeat customers? And of those repeat customers, how many of them are really loyal? What does loyal look like? Right? All of these are the types of questions that immediately you can begin to answer with reasonably little effort because the data is there. It's a question of geofencing, defining the networks, creating the right radials, and beginning to measure movements of devices on a mass scale in and out of those geofences. And you can build a surprisingly interesting picture off the back of that. So on the one hand, it's kind of as I mentioned, it's more sort of who's my customers. And I kind of started bridging into the second one, which is kind of what can I learn more about? How do I compare my venue versus, say, my competitors. So what's my market share of footfall between my competitive set of retail businesses is a very interesting space for a lot of our customers. They seem to really engage on that front quite well, as you'd expect, right? Because the moment you start to ask these sort of questions and you get that kind of insight, it opens up all numerous other possibilities of, okay, well, knowing what I know, do I need all the stores that I have? If I close this store and open another one over here, how will that impact my footfall, for instance, numbers? You can begin to model on the back of it, and you can build reasonably robust predictive models to better understand desired outcomes, whether that is footfall based or revenue based, or depending on the kind of data that you're working with, you can start to do all sorts of interesting possibilities. And so some of the conversations we've had have evolved into that kind of space, which is to say, we're in a highly competitive market. We feel that we could optimize our network, and we need to better understand that where we should expand as we move forward. And these are the kind of questions that you can, I wouldn't say provide a smoking gun answer, but a very strong and key indicative layer of data, or that would help you make the decision better. And we're talking typically about companies that would invest reasonably large amounts of money for a one-off snapshot research study that by the time it gets produced and put on your table, you're probably already about a month late. Right. And of course, you have it sort of loses its value quite quickly after that. So one of the things that I think our customers are excited about, certainly what we're excited about, is that you do have a continuous data, daily updated. You can see the trends on a pretty granular level. And then you can start to compare things from month to month, day of week, time of year. It doesn't stop. Right. So those two areas, better understanding your customers, better understanding your venue and how your venues are performing in a competitive context, are two that you could probably broadly put under the umbrella of business intelligence, right, is probably the best way to sort of look at that. And the number of metrics that you can build, so far we haven't had an engagement with a customer where any two company really has exactly the same KPIs or metrics that they're measuring. And if you factor into that you're talking about different industry verticals, I talked a lot about retail, but it's not just retail. We're working with companies in education, companies in automotive, which is kind of retail, right? And looking at it, banking and finance, also big overlaps on retail, but very different customer journeys, very different business KPIs. The way they look at their business challenges is somewhat different. I know you guys will have a lot more experience in that even than we do, right? So the business intelligence part is a big part. The third, I would say, pillar to this would be about creating audiences. So new segmentation opportunities. And that goes back to my previous roles in or the previous world where I come from. We used to spend a lot of time analyzing online behaviors and creating custom audience segments on the back of it. And those custom audience segments could get quite granular and allowed advertisers, brands, businesses to be able to go after audience segments that really had the best relevant fit to what they're trying to sell. And so we're doing the same thing. The only difference is that we take, physical behaviors, movements of mobile devices over time. We look at the day part. We look at recency, frequency. We apply rules. And you can start to build as many different audience segments as you want. So to go back to a previous example, we talked about, okay, well, I want to know how's my in-store footfall comparing with one of my competitors. Oh, okay, well, that's great. Well, what's the overlaps? How many of my visitors are also going to this competitor? Okay, well, that's interesting. Could I create an audience out of that? Yes, you can. Then you can take that audience and you can upload it into effectively any ad tech platform which accepts advertising IDs. An ad ID is provided by it's a unique code identifier. Every person, obviously with a device, linked to the device, has a unique ad ID. So if two of us have an app and you've downloaded both of those apps, we wouldn't know that you've downloaded both of those apps, but we both have the same ad ID, right, within our database. So that means that it's the same unique identifier, irrespective of which ad tech platforms or platforms that you're trying to target. So, for example, Facebook, Google, programmatic, Bliss, any of these sort of well-known ad tech platforms that does ingest ad IDs, you can take those and you can target them. So very quick summary, sort of business intelligence, right? Looking at customers, better understanding your venues and in a competitive context, and then on audiences, so segmentation. And that's really where we're seeing at the moment the location data and analytics coming to the fore.
Super insightful, Dimitri. I think let's unpack a bit when you say audiences, right? And let's pick a specific use case over here because you had a lot of information, what you just spoke about. So typically when brands think of audiences, they have a very unilateral view that how the customer is interacting with me, what are the purchases, how he has been, purchasing with me historically. But what you just said, it just opens up the dimensions. So it's not just, if I'm selling a gym subscription, how that customer is going to a particular type of cafes or going to a particular type of, restaurants, buying some other fashions, specifics, products. So I think it's more about opening up the dimensions, and it allows brands to do two things, right? Further optimize the campaigns and then also further optimize the partnerships. So not run after the traditional partnerships. You can, I am a gym subscriber. I can do a partnership with the cafe houses. Is there any case studies or something that's live on the ground that your customer are exploring this information about?
So I'd like to say that there's a lot because there should be, and I think you hit onto a very interesting point, which is to say that I would term what you mentioned as kind of like a second party data deal. So that's to say, I know, all the people that have been coming and looking to buy a car, that would be worth a lot of value to a car insurance provider, right? That type of thing we've seen little bits, in all honesty, not enough. And I think that it would be fair to forecast that we'll be seeing a lot more of that, where there's that synergistic understanding that certain products and services naturally work together. So if you're buying an airline ticket on Emirates.com, the next thing they're pushing you is, well, you can rent a car, you can get travel insurance, do you need a hotel? It makes sense, right? And it gives you a lot of cross-sell and upsell. But you're doing that through one platform. What we're able to do is say, well, we know that these are the people that are in the market for a car. And any service that you would link to it, whether it's a window tinting or automotive insurance sales or anything that you can think of, right? You're opening the doors for now taking a very nicely custom audience that is in market, is relevant for your business, and you can target them with precision across any ad tech platform that you need. Now think about that for a second, because we've never had, in all honesty, that level of precision capability. For most of my history, being in the digital marketing space, the kind of audiences that we were given were very generic. It would be like, because somebody visited this website once in the last month, they're interested in football. It's as poor as that. Yeah. It really is. The more you dig into it and you scratch the surface to see what's going on here, what actually are we buying, you start to uncover that really it's quite vague and it's just not so relevant. So we're very much aware of that, and we've seen fantastic results when we work with clients, advertisers, to build an audience that's very custom and relevant to their business. So that's to say, I'm not coming to you with something generic and saying just buy it. I'm saying to you, let's figure out and understand your business, and you can create specific tactical activations for individual, highly custom audiences that may fit a specific product, may fit a promotion, may fit a something specific that you're trying to say, a message that you're trying to push out there. And then back to your point on the second party data deals, we're going to see, I think, a lot more of that in the future, because in a way it is almost like what we're doing is we're almost building a custom audience, which is like a first party data audience, right? But the difference here is that it's actually a third party data set. Right, so it's not that we're looking at your website and what you've captured and the cookies that you've accumulated, you now can retarget them. It's a case of, well, actually these are individuals that have displayed specific behavioral patterns that you think is very valuable, and well, let's test it and find out. In some instances where we have been doing some nice campaign activations to that level, we've seen double-digit uplifts when it comes to in-store attribution, for instance, or when it comes to, in one case, we had the number of not leads, but conversions from leads. So actual sales was up by a significant margin. And, those are advertisers that now, once they've dipped into this, they're quite continuous with us. So we're seeing a lot of business coming from these guys. What we need is more and more of them, to witness this, experience it, and then, to get involved.
I think wonderful. Great to hear that. And I'm sure you would have answered the question that I'm about to ask many, many times over. But let's address the elephant in the room, data privacy, right? It's really something which cannot be compromised. It's a behavioral information, obviously valuable, but customers are choosing to share it, right? But still there is a caveat and the line needs to be drawn. So what are your thoughts? How do we address this data privacy concerns that, even your potential clients might have?
So yeah, absolutely. So the industry has been going through, I would say, enormous upheaval over the last 2-3 years for a lot of the media furore around Facebook and Google and GDPR and subsequent regulations that have come out in the US, South Africa, for example, and the Far East. And all of those are instances of governments trying to get a better handle on the rights of consumers, rights of people, of individuals, to protect and understand what's being done with their data. And I think that there's a growing recognition that data is a commodity that you're trading as a customer. And if you are accessing platforms for free or you're not paying them, then what they're collecting from you is obviously the data so that they can better target their advertising, right? And that's really, I think, has been, I hope, for the most part of a broader awareness, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we need to take it lightly. It is important to note that from an IQ data standpoint, that the data that we work with is always aggregate level. So that's the first point. None of the benefits or value that I've been speaking about throughout this interview would be possible if we're talking about individuals. It really needs to be at scale, right, for it to have any meaning. So, of course, we're not interested in pinpointing individual devices, nor do we have the capabilities of doing that, in all honesty. But we do take it at an aggregate level. We do not collect personal identifiable information. So PII, as we would say, is off limits. None of our app partners provide us anything that could identify a user in any way, shape, or form. Secondly, we have a lag in the data ingest that ensures that any of the visualization or metrics that we're building, mapping of location signals, is happening not real time and not near time. There'll be typically between 24 hours to 48 hours lag. So that's to say, if there is a device spotted somewhere in some isolated space. By the time you were to go there, you would never be able to find that device. It's historical data. It's not. And in all honesty, most of the work that we do is based upon historical. We're not working with clients or businesses who are looking to target audiences while they're in a specific space. That's not the way we work. What we're doing is we're saying that these are behaviors and profiles of audiences that you can target somewhere, wherever, irrespective, but it's about using location as an indicator to their interests and their habits versus I want to target them while they're at a specific location, right? And I think that second part of that, I think, starts to cross that line that you talked about. You have to be very careful. On the Wi-Fi front, the venues are all obviously they're under strict terms and conditions when it comes to the use or capture of emails and mobile numbers. And of course, this is everywhere, right? So any website you go on or any Wi-Fi network that you're accessing, whether you provide that information, they're not giving us access to that. That's within, behind sort of garden fences, right? Ring fenced behind. And so these are, I think, fundamental important steps that we do as a company to ensure that we are not infringing upon privacy. Now, are we GDPR compliant yet? We're working on it. And I think anybody in this industry and in this part of the world will tell you that GDPR is still itself evolving, and most companies are working very hard to understand what compliance actually looks like. And compliance, when it gets into the location analytics or data space, still has a long way to go yet. So I foresee that we're going to see more regulation coming through, both within existing markets like Europe, where GDPR is now established, and in new countries like, let's say, our part of the world. There'll be legislation coming through or regulations coming through on that will govern us. It's our job as data processors to ensure that we're working towards some form of better compliance, and being prepared for what is kind of essentially like a GDPR gold standard moving forward. And so that's really where we're at today.
Wonderful. I think, to be very honest, we are really, really excited what location analytics can do. And we really thank you today for sharing all these valuable experiences with us. Super insightful, and we really hope that it proves to be super beneficial for our platform and the users of the platform. Thank you, Dimitri.
Thank you so much, Dimitri.
Thank you guys for having me.